Hi folks, how are you? Thank you for joining us on the Evans Model Shop YouTube channel. I'm Luke, the RC Tech here at Evans Model Shop in Santa Monica, California. And today we're going to go over a build that we recently completed here. It's kind of like a resto-mod, restoration kind of a build. It is a monster truck called the XTM X Factor. This was released by XTM probably in the early to mid 2000s when they were really hitting their stride. You might remember XTM for making quite a few 8-scale buggy-based monster trucks, including the Mammoth. The XTM Accelerator and Nitro Accelerator were really popular at one point. And they were mostly known in the beginning, at least, of XTM, kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were a Tower Hobbies brand, so it's like a hobby co-brand, as like a cheap entry into 8-scale Nitro, and then they kind of branched out after that. This truck, this particular truck, like I said, is from like the early to mid 2000s. It's a little difficult to find information on these. They're definitely not the most common thing around. And that played a huge role in the level of difficulty I was kind of finding parts for this while we were doing the restoration. This particular restoration took us here about a year and a half, kind of on and off, trying to find parts for it. Drivetrain parts were difficult, and when this came to us, it was in very rough condition. The only thing that's left on it that isn't real clean are the wheels and tires, which aren't original wheels and tires. I mean, the wheels look nice, but the tires do have some of that telltale, like, nitro leavings on them. I think the tires are kind of unique, and they're definitely super early 2000s, late 90s-ish looking. They're aftermarket, they are XTM, and it's worth noting that these wheels are 14mm hex wheels, and they're by far the largest bead diameter wheel in that hex size I think I've ever seen. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are insanely huge for the size of the hex. You'll notice right off the bat that the XTM X Factor has fixed axle front and rear suspension. It is four-wheel drive, of course, and it has a really unorthodox, even with the body on, you can see it kind of cantilevered 8-shock setup that makes use of 2 shocks per corner. So when you stock, it didn't have the 4-shock setup. It was push rods down to the axles, and then the shocks were on the cantilevered portion up higher on the chassis. This one came to us. This particular truck has every aftermarket part you could have bought for these. So it has all the aluminum cantilevers, which you need when you're running the 8-shock setup. It came to us with the 8 shocks, so when we did the restoration, I decided to leave it that way. It was a very popular modification to do these trucks when they were around, and they weren't around much, like I said. I remember I was pretty big into the Nitro monster truck scene when it was popular and when these were around, and I very rarely saw any of these. They were expensive, temperamental, and you had everything else going on that you had with XTM. Parts availability was never excellent, and they didn't get picked up by a lot of local hobby shops, at least not where I lived, here in Southern California. So before we take the body off, let's have a look at the suspension travel that you can get out of this. I mean, it's got some pretty insane suspension travel. It's almost like you could call this a nitro rock crawler. Has a great deal of body roll when you're like driving it around, if it's getting any sort of traction. It drives a lot like, and it has like a visual presence to it that's a lot like a legit old school monster truck would have. Like I said, the tons of body roll, kind of dives down in the front end when you hit the brakes. It's really got a lot of suspension travel going on. And it's worth noting that the example of the suspension travel that you just saw is with sway bars installed. So it has like an anti-roll bar kind of thing to limit the suspension travel a little bit. So with that removed, I mean, these wheels and tires can go all the way up and touch the body. Which brings me to the body. The body is a J Concepts extended cab 1993 Ford F-Series pickup truck. It's kind of open-ended F-Series because you can build it out and it has stickers for a F-150, F-250, or an F-350. I left this one debadged because I kind of wanted it to have the look that it has, clean, like a real monster truck sort of a vibe with the clear bed. And if you look there, Steve, cameraman Steve, behind the lens once again, thank you, sir. You'll notice that it has teardropped wheel wells, so it's really in keeping with the look of like a legit fiberglass monster truck body. This piece here is one of the reasons I really liked this body and decided to go with it. It's called a racer back, and the XTM X Factor has a grab handle. Of course, the heatsink on this giant oversized motor kind of interferes with using it, but it has this grab handle here that you can pick up the truck by, and that's part of an integrated roll cage that we'll see in a moment when we remove the body. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, this paint job, by the way, I did this paint job to just kind of, I don't know, some's hits, some's misses. Let me know what you think about it. You know, I'm kind of curious because it's a very polarizing paint job. One of the more so polarizing paint jobs that I think I've done. People either really dig it or not. The X is for X Factor, obviously, and I was kind of ghosting on the idea if this was like a legit X Factor monster truck, like Monster Jam status or something, what kind of paint, what it might look like. And I wasn't really trying to spend all day on it. So, well, all day I probably did spend, but maybe not a couple weeks like you might see with crazy airbrush ones. Let's go ahead and get this pulled. You can see there that the body is very precisely cut, and there you see the clear bed and how that was all done to go over the top of the motor. Here's that chromoly kind of roll cage that we were talking about that it has going on. That integrated grab handle, and then that goes down to verticals that bolt into the chassis. This is your onboard receiver pack is right here, and the radio box, it is an XTM radio box, but it's off of an XTM Mammoth parts truck that I had laying around. I wasn't going to do anything with it, so I figured it'd be really clean to sort of keep it in the family and do it that way. This truck has four-wheel steering, so this extra little outcropping you see right here, I'll rotate it real quick so I can show you. That's a fine-tune adjustment for the trim on the rear wheel steering. So eventually there's going to be a little hole in the side of the body where you can reach in there with a screwdriver and kind of adjust that. It's a standalone because I didn't use a radio system that allowed me to slave a separate channel in order to do that. So it's kind of analog adjustment with this little potentiometer that's on the truck. Radio antenna is short. We made use, when we drove this car, we made use of a Spectrum DX4C. That's one of the shop radio systems that we have laying around here with a couple of extra receivers, and I like to make use of that one a lot. This air intake is pretty trick looking. I liked it, so I installed it on here. It's pretty cool the way it looks. That's an associated air intake from one of their 8-scale buggies. The engine is a donor mill that we had laying around. That's an LRP ZR30. That company's out of business now, but this motor's definitely a rooster. And we had to cut the chassis, mill it out a little bit in order to make clearance for the motor. It's got real good compression. I've had it sitting around for a while. This is probably the third truck that I've had it in, so it's seen some use. The original high-tech, well, not original, but what it came with is right here. That's the high-tech throttle servo that it uses. This here is a transmission servo. It does have a reverse gear, and it's a mechanical shifter. It's a 2-speed forward and reverse, just like the original T-Max was, which this was actually designed to compete with the original T-Max. I don't know exactly in what universe they could be considered in the same class. XTM kind of got ahead of themselves a little bit, but so XTM was doing a lot of 8-scale hardware, 8-scale drivetrain, so naturally the truck that they made as an answer to the T-Max and eventually the T-Max 2.5 and the Savage that HPI had at the time was something like this. Just a big block pan chassis monster, you know? The drivetrains that come down are kind of like a castellated drivetrain sleeve that mates up two male ends into like a female to female sleeve that's on the front and back, and that allows for expansion of the drivetrains as the, or the drive shafts rather, as the suspension articulates. At the front and rear, it's using Savox servos. I don't remember the exact item number on them. Let's see. It's an SW023 or 0231 MG. So these are Metal Gear servos, and it really does need them. You can see the front one is mounted there, and then the rear one is right here. And we just kind of took the wiring from the servos and routed them up there. The fuel tank, obviously, you see the engine there, and then the transmission's pretty cool because the input gear and input shaft to the transmission is way up at the top of the transmission, and then all the power transfer takes place down below deck, kind of at the chassis, so to speak. So this is all down here. It has this kind of cool skid plate built into the bottom of it, and that gives you a real good view of kind of the underside of the truck. It doesn't have like that chain drive transfer case that the Kyosho ones did that was so rad, but they went about it in kind of a different way, and it's pretty cool. You can see there that as the suspension articulates, the bump steer on this is absolutely unmanageable. It kind of adds to that loosey-goosey handling charm we talked about that's really really true to the whole monster truck vibe. This is probably one of the more pure examples, with Kyosho's products aside, one of the more pure examples of like a nitro fixed axle monster truck, borderline almost like rock crawler status truck I've ever seen. We decided to put a real small pinion gear on it so it has a ton of torque. It's a real climber. It's really been a lot of fun. Another cool thing about these XTM X Factor trucks is the pipe. It has this like dual exit, big tail pipe on it with dual pipe hangers. And when it's going, it looks like a rear exhaust coming out of the truck. It looks really cool. There you see with the body off, you can see again in kind of slow motion there, the articulation of these shocks and kind of how it works. And take it from me, I'm the one standing here doing it, the suspension articulation on this is really fluid and just really nice. Some of the aftermarket stuff that we've done to this, besides the obvious stuff like radio system, this that I already went over, it's using 8-scale buggy motor standoffs, and it's also using a motor mounting plate from a Kyosho Inferno that I sourced in order to make this work, and the chassis did have to be milled in order to accommodate the engine, because the engine is oversized even for something like this. So we'll go ahead and put the body back on this. That looks nice. And yeah, it's just like, I think, like I said, this came out when I was in late junior high, early high school, and I always thought they were a kick. I always kind of had a thing for them. So when this one came through, this was part of another one of those bulk buys I did where people had like a lot of really badly beat up nitro RC cars that just hadn't been taken care of very well. Steve and I went ahead and restored this one. I really appreciate him a lot because he had a lot to do with getting it cleaned up and getting it ready for me to kind of get into the nitty-gritty and hunt down the parts. So as cool as this truck is, just as a warning to anybody who wants to take one of these on, be prepared for a parts hunt that lasts a long, long time because these parts are not exactly easy to come by. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I appreciate you. Let me know what you think in the comments section. And hit the like button, subscribe if you like, because we're always doing some kind of unique RC stuff over here. And it'd be nice to have you. Thanks a lot. Take care.